East of the Philippines, earthquakes appear scattered across a flat map. Turn that same pattern sideways, and a hidden slope emerges, shallow near the ocean, deeper beneath the Philippine Islands. That slope traces an oceanic plate entering the Earth. The Philippine Trench marks the upper edge of its descent. This hidden shape explains why two earthquakes near the same trench can mean very different things. One may rupture close to the boundary between two plates. Another may break inside the descending plate itself. They belong to one broad tectonic system, but they do not represent the same movement. To understand the Philippine Trench, we must follow the earthquakes downward. The Philippine Trench extends along the eastern side of the central and southern Philippines. It is often described as roughly 1,500 kilometers long. The trench passes offshore from Samar, Philippines, continues beside Mindanao, and reaches south toward Halmahera, Indonesia. Farther north, subduction along the eastern Philippines continues through the East Luzon Trough. This scale matters because the Philippine Trench does not belong to one province, one island, or one earthquake scenario. Its direction changes, its distance from land changes, and its underground geometry becomes especially complex toward the south. The name identifies the larger tectonic system. The earthquake's exact location identifies which part of that system moved. Within the Philippine Trench lies Emden Deep, the deepest known part of the trench. It reaches approximately 10,540 meters below sea level. Place Mount Everest inside it, and the mountain summit would remain submerged beneath about 1.7 kilometers of water. In March 2021, Filipino oceanographer Deo Florence Onda descended to Emden Deep aboard the submersible Limiting Factor. He became the first Filipino to reach the deepest part of the Philippine Trench. That achievement gave a human scale to an environment far beyond ordinary diving. But ocean depth and earthquake depth are not the same thing. The 10,540-meter measurement describes the seafloor. The tectonic system continues much farther beneath it. The Philippine Sea Plate approaches the eastern side of the Philippine archipelago. Along the Philippine Trench, that oceanic plate bends and descends beneath the Philippines. This process is called subduction. The motion is slow on a human timescale, but it continues over years, centuries, and geological time. Where movement along the plate boundary is resisted, surrounding rock can deform and accumulate strain. Rupture releases part of that stored deformation as seismic waves, the vibrations experienced as earthquake shaking. The Philippines has an unusually complex tectonic setting. Subduction systems face opposite directions on the eastern and western sides of the country, while the Philippine Fault passes through the archipelago. The Philippine Trench forms the major subduction boundary on the eastern side of that arrangement. Scientists cannot directly watch an oceanic plate descend hundreds of kilometers into the planet. Earthquake depth helps reveal its path. Near the trench, some earthquakes occur at relatively shallow depths. Farther beneath the region, other earthquakes happen inside the plate after it has already descended. When these locations are plotted in cross-section, they form an inclined seismic zone associated with the sinking slab. Research focused on the southern segment of the Philippine Trench found that the Philippine sea slab extends to depths of approximately 450 to 600 kilometers. The study also found unusually complicated geometry in this southern section. That result should not be applied automatically to every part of the trench. Still, it reveals the system's vertical scale. Emden Deep lies a little over 10 kilometers beneath the sea surface. The subducted plate in the southern system continues hundreds of kilometers deeper into Earth. Earthquake depth turns an invisible structure into something scientists can trace. On August 31, 2012, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake occurred offshore from eastern Samar, Philippines. Its location placed it near the Philippine Trench system. But analysis showed that the main earthquake did not occur directly on the principal plate boundary interface. It ruptured within the subducting Philippine Sea Plate at a depth of roughly 30 to 50 kilometers. Scientists classify this as an intraplate earthquake, an event occurring inside a tectonic plate rather than directly between two plates. The wider sequence also involved interaction between faulting inside the descending plate and faulting along the plate boundary. This shows why map position alone can be misleading. Two earthquakes may appear near the same trench. One may occur on the boundary between the plates. Another may begin within the plate as it bends or descends. Their locations place them inside the same tectonic neighborhood. Their depths and faulting mechanisms reveal what actually broke. Because the Philippine Trench lies beneath the ocean, some earthquakes associated with the system can generate tsunamis. But a large offshore earthquake does not automatically produce a destructive tsunami. The movement of the seafloor is critical. When a shallow earthquake causes rapid vertical displacement across a large area of the ocean bottom, it pushes or pulls the water above it. That disturbance can spread outward as tsunami waves. An earthquake that occurs too deeply produces limited seafloor deformation, or moves mainly horizontally may generate a much smaller tsunami or no significant tsunami. Magnitude is therefore only part of the information. Scientists also examine the earthquake's depth, the shape and orientation of the fault, the area that ruptured, and the amount of vertical seafloor displacement. Official tsunami bulletins combine earthquake analysis with monitoring data. A magnitude number alone cannot determine the coastal threat. The Philippine Trench lies seaward of communities facing the Philippine Sea. These include parts of Samar and eastern Mindanao, including Davao Oriental. Earthquakes associated with the system can transmit strong shaking toward the eastern Philippines. Offshore rupture can also produce tsunami danger when the required seafloor displacement occurs. But the trench does not create one identical outcome along its entire length. An event offshore from Samar, Philippines, may involve a different section and rupture mechanism from an event offshore from Mindanao. Distance, depth, rupture behavior, offshore topography, and receiving coast geometry can all influence the result. This is why the Philippine Trench matters as a system, not as a single disaster scenario. It has verified earthquake and tsunami capability. The effects of any particular event depend on which section moves and how the rupture develops. When an earthquake is reported east of the Philippines, 4 details help reveal its meaning. First, location. Where did it occur relative to the trench and the islands? Second, depth. Was it close to the shallow boundary or deeper inside the descending plate? Third, mechanism. Did the fault move through compression, extension, or sideways slip? Fourth, the official tsunami bulletin. Did monitoring agencies identify a credible displacement of the sea? These details turn an earthquake from a magnitude and a dot into evidence of movement inside a 3-dimensional system. The trench name gives the tectonic setting. The event data reveal which part moved. Emden Deep gives the Philippine Trench an extraordinary number: 10,540 meters beneath the sea. Earthquake depth gives it something even more revealing: a shape. The shallow events mark activity near the ocean boundary. Deeper events follow the plate beneath the Philippines. And the 2012 earthquake offshore from eastern Samar, Philippines, showed that the descending plate can fracture from within. Together, these clues reveal what the ocean surface cannot. The Philippine Trench is the beginning of a tectonic structure extending deep into the planet. Scientists can map that structure, identify different earthquake mechanisms, and explain what the system is capable of producing. That understanding does not provide a date for the next major rupture. It provides something more dependable, a clearer way to understand the event when movement happens. The next time an earthquake is reported east of the Philippines, look beyond its magnitude. Its depth may reveal where inside the descending system the rupture began. Nature forces. Follow the source, and the earthquake becomes clearer.